Hello there, this is Sohail Hasni, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Hi, Sonia. Good to see you again. I can't believe that last time you were a guest was October 2020. My God, it's been almost 5 years. And
Yes.
in that time, you were working on very much climate change. You mentioned you're a family of environmentalists, right? Everybody is in there. Now you are running Solar Alliance. Maybe you just tell us what you are doing. I know a lot of exciting stuff.
Sohail, it's fantastic to speak to you again after so many years. And now that I've changed hats, I am now helping with the team to run the Global Solar Council. We are the global solar PV. So we bring together the global solar PV industry from every part of the world, from the smallest Pacific islands to China, to Europe, to sub-Saharan Africa, to North and South America, every part of the world. Value chain from the manufacturers and the project developers and the installers across every market segment. And so what we're doing is really representing the global solar industry, representing it in terms of the global policy and energy diplomacy processes, where obviously solar is the key solution to meeting our global energy access, sustainable development, energy transition goals, but also representing it in the media and, of course, starting initiatives that resolve the global challenges that are facing us as an industry. So obviously we are growing exponentially at the moment. This year we are expecting almost 700 gigawatts of deployment around the world, more than anyone could have dreamt of 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And yet there are still challenges facing us and challenges in the way for us to be able to really scale up as a technology. And we are working on those as the Global Solar Council to achieve our target, which is 8 terawatts of total installed capacity, or put it another way, 25 billion solar panels installed by the end of this decade. Almost all of them from now on installed together with battery storage, and really helping to deliver the zero carbon electricity that we need in order to make economies competitive and achieve our goals in terms of both development and in terms of the climate transition.
Wow. Billions of solar panels. So that's almost 5 or 6 solar panel per person.
If you look at it in terms of watts per capita, you see how much more potential there is for growth. So Australia, which is obviously likely to be the host not of this COP, but the next COP, is the country in the world that has the highest number of solar panels per head of population. The Netherlands is not far behind, but I can tell you, in the big beasts of China, Brazil, India, South Africa, Indonesia, Nigeria, there is so much potential to ramp up the number of solar panels per capita. And that's where the growth is going to come from.
Yeah, because Australia still has a long way to go. We have about, I think, 34 gigawatt behind the meter solar. And the whole sort of national market is close to that as well. So just imagine when that number gets doubled, and especially the $2.8 billion subsidy the government is giving for home batteries, solar is going to take over the world, absolutely.
It really is. Solar is going to take over the world. We are the fastest growing source of electricity the world has ever seen. And we are the cheapest source of electricity the world has ever seen. Solar is a technology that's really driving the growth of renewables around the world and is the leading source of new electricity generation capacity. So we are winning. There is no doubt about it. As The Economist magazine said the other day, we are on the verge of a new solar era. The era of fossil fuels has been left behind. The era of nuclear is behind us. We are now entering a solar era, and it is fundamentally changing how we generate electricity and how we are moving from a centralized way of generating electricity in big power plants to a system where regular people like you and me put solar panels on their houses and generate electricity from their own rooftop and store it in battery storage in their basement. And that is so exciting because it really is a total democratization of how we generate our power.
Yes, because I have a 11 kilowatt rooftop solar and I have a 13.5 kilowatt hour battery at home. So yeah, that is also an amazing feeling when you feel that you're in total control in a way, right? Because your energy is self-sufficient, not at a national level, but as an individual level. Of course, there could be bad weathers and other scenarios, but then you will have electric vehicles sitting with 50 kilowatt hour fully charged. So then vehicle to grid will come in. So there are a lot of exciting stuff happening. But tell me one thing though, if you are doing so much solar, the prices will keep coming down still. Is there any forecast as to how low it might go? Do you want to give some indicative prices?
Yeah, panels are very cheap. A typical solar panel, if you buy it in bulk, $50, $60, a bit less, who knows? But the price curve is certainly flattening. We saw huge reductions in costs over the last 10 years, but it's the inverse of the exponential curve in terms of deployment. But it's flattening. We're not going to see the same rate of change in terms of the cost decreases that we've seen over the last 10 years. And indeed, even we are in an awkward situation at the moment where the major manufacturers are really struggling to make ends meet with the current low global prices for solar. Right? We are in a situation of overcapacity in terms of manufacturing capacity. Now, some of that is outdated technologies, but still. And the manufacturers are really hurting financially at the moment. They're struggling to make manufacturing really economic. So I don't really want to give a prediction in terms of cents per watt, right? I leave that to the analysts. I don't want the industry to end up being a hostage to fortune. But what I can predict is in terms of gigawatts per year. So we think that this year we will be at about 700 gigawatts per year. We think that about 2028, 29 will be the moment where we reach 1 terawatt per year of deployment. We think with a bit of luck and with a big push from governments, we might be at 8 terawatts total installed capacity by the end of this decade. And then we really need to be moving quite quickly to about 2.5 or 3 terawatts a year. And at some point that will plateau off, right? The growth in deployment will not continue increasing forever. It will reach some kind of plateau in a typical S curve. But that's the kind of what we see in terms of the forecast. So the International Energy Agency thinks there are about 25 million rooftop solar domestic residential rooftop solar installs around the world. We think it's higher than that. We think it's probably about double than that, actually, if you count all the off-grid solar and storage as well in developing countries and so on. But what's really interesting is that gives households, businesses, a completely new form of energy security and resilience against any kind of external impact. So if they are wired in order to be able to do off-grid, gives them resilience to blackouts and load shedding. It gives people resilience to climate impacts, natural disasters, hurricanes, and so on. And of course, also it gives a country or a community resilience to any kind of other shocks. And so we really need to be thinking about how, especially rooftop solar, can really enhance the resilience and the energy security of individual families, of businesses, of communities, and of entire countries. And I think that is what is so powerful, actually, especially in the current geopolitical context about what we can do in solar.
That will happen. And also, if we look at the consumer end, what people don't see that rooftop solar, the large scale solar prices have been almost close to 1 cent, India, Saudi Arabia, 3-4 years back. And if it's 1 cent a kilowatt hour, or even a 2 cents, average car, electric car needs about 10 to 12 kilowatt hour to do 100 kilometers. And if you can produce that 12 kilowatt hour with 15 cents, basically, if you can carry 5 people for 15 cents, 100 kilometers, we are living in a very different world because fossil fuel have been into everything, right? The transport component, whether it's coming through ship or air or a taxi, or like it's a fuel component. And if we can shift people from A to B or goods from A to B at such a cheaper price, that ramification would be huge. What you mentioned, 700 gigawatt hour, this gigawatt hour now eventually We'll saturate our existing demand with the batteries. It will go to everywhere. Lights
Yeah.
with LEDs are also efficient. So that can really change our lifestyle thinking and take all the divides we have, energy
Yeah.
divide.
Yeah. And to put what you're saying another way, solar electricity, whether you're thinking about the wholesale price or the retail price, allows us to dream of doing things with electricity that we have never done before,
Yep,
that we have
absolutely.
never allowed ourselves to dream before. So, of course, yes, that's partly the huge impact in terms of electric vehicles and transport and so on. But also, if you think about having this abundant, almost zero cost solar electricity, allows us to dream of using air conditioning in ways that we've never dreamt of doing before. And that is going to become more and more important with increasing temperatures. It allows us doing desalination on
Yep.
scales that we've never dreamt of doing before. It allows us to electrify entire industries in a way that would be completely uneconomic otherwise. We're completely revolutionizing the entire electricity sector by bringing down the marginal cost of electricity. Now, obviously, there will still be cost to that, and some of the tender prices in the Gulf and so on have been a bit misleading, but also by completely changing where we generate electricity. This is now about regular people using their roof or their balcony. There's a big trend towards balcony solar, plug-in solar, hung outside a window, hung off a balcony, to generate power on site and to store that power on site and to use and to share that power on site. And we are working on producing modeling for Indonesia, for Malaysia, for Sri Lanka, for India, for Pakistan, for Bangladesh, for all of these countries, which shows that if these countries choose an energy path that really emphasizes the distributed and the behind the meter solar and storage, that in some cases your grid investment upgrade needs can be reduced by 50%. So with that, and maybe even more, because the more you incentivize self-consumption of rooftop solar electricity, the less you need the grid, right? Now, obviously, you will always need the grid to some extent for the times that solar plus battery storage can't cover. And we absolutely need a mix of all renewables, including wind, including hydropower, including long duration storage, geothermal, all green hydrogen, in order to create that sort of viable mix across all technologies. We have to completely rethink how we manage an electricity grid. And a lot of the coverage of in the aftermath of the Spanish and Portuguese blackout fundamentally is down to the question of how are we going to provide the inertia we need to over the next years. And it's remarkable how actually battery storage is a huge part of the solution.
Yes, battery is going to do what it did to the water supply. Not everybody has to wait for, okay, let's wait until there is a rain, I'll have a shower, because there is a water storage everywhere, right? And now we don't even think about that. Really source of water in this world is rain or ocean, right? A river gets all from the rain, right? We don't think because we have tons and tons of storage in different form everywhere, right? So I think that's the penny has to drop. If I'm drinking a glass of water, it is also a storage of water, right? I'm not waiting for
Yes.
a running stream, right? So the batteries go everywhere. But the thing that intrigues me most, that average Australian consumes about 15 kilowatt hour a day. And across Asia, all the Asian countries that you mentioned, I worked in a lot of across. You look at Pakistan, Bangladesh, you look at Afghanistan, all the Central Asian, and if you go down Southeast Asia, average per capita consumption is very low. India may be less than a couple of kilowatt hour, if you look really average, because people basically use it for lights. And that 5, 6 kilowatt hour, even a 10 kilowatt hour a day today, panel the size of a television now produces 400 watt, 500 watt, maybe the more efficiency. Everybody gets 3, 4 hours of sun. So it's already 2 kilowatt hour. That fundamentally will change like kerosene consumption. So I think solar is going to do way more than what we can think of right now as people start using them, because still I think there is a bit of mindset issue, because they're not going to do. I
And
think
that's why we are running a big campaign this year, which is simply called Possible with Solar. and is encouraging people to dream of what is possible with solar. And it's partly about our 10-year anniversary as an organization, which is also, of course, the 10-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. So solar for agriculture, for water pumping and irrigation, for medical and agricultural cold chains, for interruptible power supply, displacing diesel generators in terms of uninterruptible power supply. All of that, what is sometimes in China is called solar plus, is about not just the technology for technology's sake and for reaching targets in terms of the tripling of renewables target that we agreed in Dubai, but what can solar do? What is possible with solar in terms of pure development, sustainable development that wasn't before? And we are actually next month in New York going to be publishing a big United Nations, a UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs report to say solar is the thing that can help achieve about 70% of the SDGs. Solar is essentially a tool for SDG attainment. And that's, of course, in terms of clean energy, of course, in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, because like I said, this is a climate adaptation and resilience technology. But food systems, clean water. If you go through all of the SDGs, almost all of them, apart from maybe 2, can be achieved with the use of solar plus battery storage, especially when you really think about how solar and battery storage can be applied to different situations. And when you think that an off-grid business in sub-Saharan Africa or somewhere else in the world that currently does not have access to electricity, if they get even a basic solar plus battery storage off-grid system, they are 27% more productive. And think about what that 27% scaled up across millions of businesses could do to economic growth.
I like this idea, what solar can do, possibilities. Let me know if I can be of any help. Really, I have a lot of crazy ideas I can give you. This is quite an amazing thing because you need to give it in people's hands, because one picture comes in my mind. It was in a rural Afghanistan setting. So we went to house, so I saw electric line crossing one area, 2 mud houses. So I was saying, where did the electric line come from? So then I went to the next house, and this lady said, this is my power company. I said, what do you do? She said, I switch on the generator that lights my house and their house, and they pay me a fee every 15 minutes or so. She can do the same with the solar and a DC system. And she had to have some money to buy a diesel genset. She has an inventory to carry. You can empower tens of thousands of people with only maybe $100,000, because it's $10 a panel, those little panels. And she can do the same with the solar and a DC system and the 50 cents LEDs. You can change. So every time you mention that lady's face come into my head, because bringing them the latest technology, the technology leapfrogging, solar may be nothing to you and I. We've been seeing this for almost 20, 25, 30 years now. Yeah. You bring it in her hand, she can run the same business with a zero marginal cost. She doesn't have to buy fuel.
Absolutely. She doesn't have to buy fuel. And part of what happened in Pakistan was that, of course, her equivalents suddenly had to pay 10 times as much for the diesel that they were paying previously. So people thought, to hell with this. We're going to climb up onto our roof and install solar panels instead. A lot of people actually used videos on TikTok to train themselves on how to install the PV, which I would never recommend from a health and safety perspective. Always get a qualified installer. But I also admire the courage and the kind of entrepreneurship of just, God damn it, I'm just going to buy some of these solar panels, climb up onto my roof, and to hell with the electricity prices that my utility want me to pay, and to hell with the diesel prices that my diesel genset wants me to use, and so on. And what's even more exciting is like an organization like Solar Aid, who work in Malawi and a couple other countries across sub-Saharan Africa. They're a charity, they're also a social enterprise. And they have really started saying, look, we don't even need your woman in Afghanistan to buy the diesel generator or to buy the solar and the batteries. We will pay the upfront cost. We will provide energy as a service. He can pay us back slowly over time, which is the pay-as-you-go model. And critically, we will own those solar panels on her house. So if they break and need a maintenance and repair, which doesn't happen very often, say something goes wrong, we will go in and fix it. And what they're starting to do in villages and regions of Malawi is saying, you know what? We're just going to put solar on the roof of every single house in this village. And it's up to the occupants if they use it or not. And we take all the risk. Obviously, the per unit installation cost comes down very far, right? We reduce the per unit installation cost. And the evidence is that people then start to use it. And then having that little bit of electricity means they can expand their business, do this, do that. The kids can do more homework and so on, which then leads to further returns, which might lead to more demand. And if they don't have the money, no problem. If they need to go for a week without power because they don't have the money to pay, that's okay too. We take that risk and we do it as a social enterprise. But so far, the evidence is that even in one of the poorest countries of the world, like Malawi, it works. And I can just imagine something similar like that maybe happening in Afghanistan or in other countries. And the great thing about this is that it's so modular and so versatile that even in the most fragile, least developed countries, conflict-stricken countries, this can work. In Syria and Lebanon, we have seen a lot of rooftop solar installed, partly in response to the fragility. Small-scale solar is the solution for the global south, the solution for the bottom of the pyramid, the solution for least developed countries, and we should never forget that as the global solar industry.
Amazing. Absolutely agree. I just want to have one correction. That's what I tried to do in my one project in Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan, did a pilot. The whole notion that we need to put a solar on the roof is actually not needed, right? Why you have to install, right? Basically, one of the project I was trying to cut down cost, and my view was I don't have to install. It is going to be one of the most expensive item for really poor household. So why don't you just keep it inside and in the morning just put it outside? And it's a DC connection. And you can just eliminate completely this installation business. As solar has become so cheap, you don't need to put into the roof. If you do DC, you can just plug and play. People will not get electric shock unless it's 66 volt. And all are DC appliances. So I think if we start thinking and treating it as a cheap goods, we don't have to, we need to put in a roof so that it doesn't get stolen. Just put it in the house. When you're sweeping the house, put it outside. I have seen one video more than 10 years ago. It was really cool that somebody actually had a electric motor inside a tire and it throws the tire inside up. It's basically a pump, submerged pump inside a pond and put a solar outside. It's his irrigation system. The water comes out. At end of the day, he pulls and takes the tire and put it inside and goes.
And this is the power of human ingenuity in many ways. Because you're absolutely right that it's not all about rooftop solar. We say rooftop solar, but actually it's about pico solar. It's about micro solar, right? It's about applying solar to a typical solar mobile phone charger, or indeed a small solar lantern like this one, the one I'm holding now, for those watching the video, which is really a solar panel the size of maybe half an iPhone screen, half a smartphone screen, and then integrated a battery inside and a solar light on the other side. You charge it during the day, use the light at night, and this product, the solar lantern, together with a slightly more advanced equivalent, which will have a USB charging point for charging a mobile phone, really is revolutionizing how we bring electricity and how we bring light into the last mile in least developed countries. And so you can imagine something a little bit bigger with a solar panel, maybe the size of a couple pages of A4, that indeed you stick outside in the daytime and then use the power at night. And also, it's not all about just roof mounted, in the sense that if you have a small plot of land where you're growing some subsistence agriculture, let's say cherry tomatoes, because that's the example I know from India, you can use a small solar structure also to protect the more fragile crops from the elements. right? To protect them from water evaporation and to protect them from hail or heavy rains or whatever it might be. And there was a great example of a farmer in India that had a cherry tomato crop. There was a huge storm. All of the local cherry tomato farmers lost their entire produce for that year, and yet he made more money than anyone in his village had ever made in their entire life because his cherry tomatoes were protected by the solar panel. And so just those kind of examples as well. But yeah, you, I'm sure, have examples of this kind of thing too.
I think what we can do, because the prices have come down so much, solar panel, I think last time I checked was 11 cents a watt peak or something. So basically a big solar panel need not to be more than, I don't know, 20, 25, $30. And then the battery prices are coming down almost $50 per kilowatt hour a cell level. Because I had a crazy idea. It was crazy 10 years ago when I tried to do a pilot. I wanted to develop what I call an electricity in a box system so that all appliances, a television and a fridge, like a USB connection that you are showing, half a dozen LEDs and a TV and a fan, all maybe $1,000. I remember posting into LinkedIn, people said, no, you cannot do. I started with 1,200, then I got into 1,000. I ultimately was able to do the pilot for 800. And then we are planning to do a huge installation in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
You know what? Right now, the whole system can be done maybe to $300. I'll show you one thing.
Amazing.
Nothing. This is the 1 kilowatt hour battery.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah.
And this is right now maybe, I think, $200, but this will be
Yeah.
$50 very soon. You can do anything. It has a built-in
Yeah.
light. This is an inverter. If you put a 400 watt solar panel, this will get charged fully within a day. So this is $200 and maybe even $50 tomorrow. So $100 solution. You can run a TV, little computer, everything else, even a little e-bike, because those consume nothing. You can ride a tiny drone for delivering from here to there. The very little kilowatt hour. You can have an electric drill, then you can make holes and everywhere. You can have a little electric saw, electric sewing machine, because this thing doesn't consume much electricity. So yeah, it's amazing.
Exactly. Possible with solar. Because electricity essentially makes humans more productive. And that's what we're interested in. But of course, we shouldn't forget about utility scale solar, the 5 gigawatt utility scale solar farm that is being built in the eastern China at the moment. There is so much that we can do as well with utility scale, and so much that we can do to make sure that utility scale is done in consultation with local communities, is done to maximize the benefits in terms of the agriculture and biodiversity and the huge power that we have there. And that's part of what's so versatile and so scalable and so modular about solar, that can be as small as a tiny solar lantern with a solar panel smaller than a smartphone screen, and as big as a 5 gigawatt solar farm that takes you 45 minutes to drive from one end to the other or more. And ultimately, it's like Lego. Every solar panel is like a Lego brick, and you can put them together in any shape or form you like. You can put it on any vehicle or mode of transport or building. And this is really what's going to change the world, what's going to deliver our policy goals in terms of both the energy transition and the Paris Agreement and development. It will be the economies that have chosen to go big on solar that will be the competitive economies of the future. This is ultimately about economic growth and competition, and that is what we are trying to get across at the Global Solar Council.
Amazing. So the solar industry association, do they also have funds available so that people can try out projects, pilot projects? Because this will eventually grow the size of the pie. Because that remote person that I mentioned in Afghanistan, she may not receive the benefit, the price reduction in a battery or a panel, because there will be so many middlemen inside. Inefficiencies, the market failures are everywhere, right? So does the industry association somehow take an active role enabling people to do leapfrogging by addressing those market failure? Like what happened in Pakistan? Why is not happening in Philippines? I asked that question on LinkedIn. It's a market failure, right? In Philippines, the cost is more than Pakistan. Per capita GDP is way higher. Why is that happening?
Absolutely. Pakistan had perfect conditions, right? High power prices, high diesel prices, no import taxes on solar coming in from China, and so on. So it had perfect conditions. We, as the Global Solar Industry Association, so obviously our job is to unite and represent the industry. We have a finance task force of our members, our member companies, and our member national industry associations to work on the finance challenges. And we've also created a platform for all the biggest global solar investors, a lot of them, of course, in utility scale solar, from both the multilateral development banks, but also, of course, the private investors that are putting in the $500 billion a year into solar to address the finance challenges. We ourselves can't give out grants or similar. We have grants for national solar industry associations. We hope to start that soon. We don't have grants for specific projects, but we are working with the International Solar Alliance, which is the intergovernmental agency working to promote solar and to help governments build up their capacity and know-how on solar and storage around the world. It's based in Delhi, in India, and they have created the Global Solar Facility, which then has a sub-fund called the Africa Solar Facility, which is all about providing that catalytic capital for project preparation, similar, in order to really get real projects off the ground in key target catalytic markets that we want to open up to the technology. And they are the ones to really go for. Then, of course, the multilateral development banks, such as the Asian Development Bank, which you know well, but also the World Bank and EIB and EBRD and Inter-American and all the others, then also working to increase the amount of finance available, both to utility scale projects where we need to make sure that they're using the right due diligence methodology and so on, but also to small scale behind the meter solar. And there's a huge role for microfinance and intermediated finance via local commercial and retail banks that can maybe add solar to mortgages they give out, that can maybe provide intermediated microfinance. And that microfinance, to be clear, is not just for the final consumers to help them cover the upfront cost of the solar system, but it's also to the actual entrepreneurs, the distributors, the businesses who are selling those solar lanterns or those solar home systems, to allow them to have the capital to buy the stock in the first place and then be able to sell it on. And it's possible that it's those microfinance lines to those micro entrepreneurs that could make the biggest difference in terms of really getting deployment off the ground in many geographies around the world.
Yes, the savings from the avoided fuel cost will pay for itself. It's so quickly. It's like almost how do you finance the gap? Like an ESCO, the energy efficiency challenge. Anyway, we can discuss on and on. Now, if the young entrepreneur who got excited saying, okay, Sonia is doing so much amazing stuff, I want to get into solar, where does one start? Where they can get more information? Is there a consolidated place where they can get a lot of information about what's happening in solar?
So first of all, you have to decide whether you want to go into utility scale solar, rooftop solar, commercial, industrial, or residential, off-grid solar, or whether you want to explore some of the niche kind of new applications, which could be those applications to, say, water pumps and so on, but can also be agri-PV, so ground-mounted large-scale solar combined with agriculture, or floating PV, which is, of course, a specialist area, which is floating solar floating on water bodies. In terms of utility scale solar, your first port of call should be the Global Solar Training Standards Initiative, where we are in the process of creating, and we've already published a first draft, global basic training for the construction and operation of utility scale solar PV, both health and safety training, but also electrical, mechanical, and technical training. We want to get to the point where every single man and, in theory, woman who builds a solar farm anywhere in the world has to go through STSI approved training that will be delivered by local training centers, always adapted to the national context and the national legislation of whatever market you're in, but will have certain basics that will apply anywhere in the world. And this is key in the Philippines, where you are, in
Mhm.
India, in the US, in the UK, and in Spain, anywhere in the world should have the same individuals building utility scale solar should have that same training. Then, in terms of rooftop solar and all the other kind of sales and functions around it, it's really a question of looking at the national, either Solar Industry Association or National Roofing Association in many countries. And for the smaller residential segment, often it can be, in some countries, almost be self-taught. But we would always recommend basic health and safety measures. It does involve working at heights. It does involve lifting heavy loads, right? Because even a solar panel, they're getting lighter and lighter, but they're still a big one is a heavy thing. And so we do want to make sure that installers are training themselves up in terms of basic health and safety. And we are hoping to create a global standard as well in terms of the installation of rooftop solar. But fundamentally, what you need is you need to think about who your customers are going to be. Very different ballgame if you're talking about residential, which is a B2C business. Your customer is essentially the final consumer. Very important there that we have good consumer codes and codes of conduct to avoid mis-selling. Or if you're in utility scale, of course, your customer is the local utility, and then you need to be making sure that you understand how the electricity market operates and also making sure that your local utility has sufficient credit worthiness to be able to offtake that power and make sure that your investors are comfortable with that. One thing I would say overall is solar is very much an industry of SMEs, of small and medium-sized enterprises. We are an SME. We are a technology done by SMEs for SMEs. We are a collection of maybe, we have a database of 15, 20, 25,000 active solar companies around the world. Even the biggest solar farm in Europe, which, if I remember correctly, is 300 or 500 megawatts. I can't remember the exact size. That was actually developed by quite a small local company. Because to develop a solar farm, you really just need a good piece of land, a good grid connection, which is not easy to come by, planning, permitting, and local planning permission, essentially. And then you bring in an EPC to deliver it once you have the finance as well. The basic ingredients can be done even by quite a small local outfit if they have the right expertise in-house in terms of how to secure these things. And so even in utility scale solar, we are very much a small and medium enterprise industry. And that is something that we are very proud of at the Global Solar Council.
Amazing. Now, are you also developing a standard documents that, like what you mentioned, the checklist and others? Of course, the people have training like a standard power purchase agreement. If I'm an SME, I want to put, how do I manage risk and others? If I'm a government, what sort of incentive package should I put out? What sort of policy? There must be a checklist or a master list that people can tick off.
This is part of our finance workstream in many ways, because contract standardization very much helps in terms of finance. But yes, so it's called the Open Solar Contracts Initiative. It's the suite of template contracts, mainly focused on utility scale, but we want to expand it to rooftop as well, where you have basic contracts in terms of land, EPC, power purchase agreement, and so on. We are planning to go through a whole process to update those contracts with some of the best lawyers in the world and experts in their field. And yes, we want to expand it to rooftop, particularly a template contract for how to lease the roof of a building or the roof of your house to a third party so that they can come and install solar on your roof and sell you the electricity via a mini PPA. And also how to deal with situations where you have a landlord-tenant problem, where the landlord is one person or one company, the tenant is another person or another company, and different contract templates in terms of how to overcome that. Because if you're asking the question, what is the fundamental reason why most buildings do not have solar on their roof? It's usually a landlord-tenant problem or a multi-occupancy building problem. And if we can come up with innovative, both regulatory solutions, but also contracting solutions to both of those situations, then the energy transition will be done in a flash.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for sharing all of this now. Tell me, where do you get all this energy?
From the solar panel that's sitting right next to me.
Thank you so much for your time. I like the energy that you bring. I know we can continue this discussion forever. Maybe I'll look you up next time in London or if you're passing through city. Is there anything else you want to share?
We should talk about trade. and the geopolitics of solar, which is sensitive but important. We should talk about ESG issues and the Solar Stewardship Initiative and the allegations of forced labor and how we're addressing those. And I think it's worth also talking about how we integrate large volumes of solar into the grid and the flexibility that we need to build into large electricity grids. I know this is more maybe developed countries, but not only. And how we need to be building in more flexibility and above all, more grid forming inverters, grid stabilizing inverters, so that we really can replace the coal and gas power stations in terms of the grid, the ancillary services that need to be provided to the grid. And that is going to be a huge part of, I think, probably the conclusion of the Spanish and the Portuguese blackout, which was obviously completely unexpected and completely unprecedented in terms of its scale. Big battery storage with grid forming inverters.
Thank you so much. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.